You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey, music fans. My name is Alan. This is the Modern Musicology Podcast. I've got two of my co-hosts here. I've got Rob.
Hey.
And Stephanie Seymour.
Sup. That's really Rob's intro, but since he didn't do it. Okay.
He didn't do it, so it's up for grabs. And we are joined by a very special guest, Ira Elliott from Not a Surf, who you were on the show, I don't know, a year or so ago.
It seems like so
long
ago.
How the heck are you, Ira?
I'm happy to be back. It seems like just yesterday. Or maybe it seems like forever ago. I don't know. I'm very happy to be back on this very suspicious occasion.
Yeah.
So you're saying it seemed like yesterday?
That's not so far away. No, you can.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm not going to, you know what? Let's let it all loose. This is a Beatley kind of day. And just like any Beatles, there's good Beatles today.
That's
right on. So, yeah, the thing that brings us all together tonight is that we are celebrating the release of what is most likely the very last brand new Beatles song. It's called Now and Then. And tonight we're going to be just diving into it. We're going to talk about the song. We're going to talk about the music video. We're going to talk about the behind the scenes making of documentary. We're going to talk about all kinds of things related to all of that stuff. Before we jump into that, though, I do want to get in a little bit of feedback from one of our previous episodes. And this is from a good buddy of ours named Eric Sensava. And he writes, "Hey guys, just listened to your final albums session. Very interesting episode, especially the artists who knew they were dying, like David Bowie and Johnny Cash. There is one more I had thought of, and that is Warren Zevon's The Wind, which he recorded when he knew he was on borrowed time due to aggressive cancer. It's a very thoughtful, poignant album. Many very well-known musicians helped him out with, such as Don Henley and Bruce Springsteen and many more. And the final track, called Keep Me in Your Heart for a While, an emotional final message. He died just a few weeks after the album was released. Thanks again for all that you do."
Eric, you know, that is so, I could not believe I forgot that album, because that it's just one of the best albums.
Just hearing the title breaks my heart.
I know.
Oh my God. It's like it's like Freddie Mercury's Who Wants to Live Forever.
Oh my God, yeah. Totally.
It's so
unbelievable.
It's so sad and so beautiful. Well, very much like the song we're going to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Very much, exactly. So Eric, thank you so much for writing to us once again. We love hearing from you, and we love hearing from anybody who's got feedback for us. You can email us at modernmusicology1@gmail.com, or just drop us a line on any of our socials.
Ira and I have known each other for like 100 years. I've known Ira since he was in a band called the Fuzz Tones, when I guess we both hung out at Danceteria a lot, and Ira played there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But I know everybody knows Ira from Not a Surf, because it's one of the best bands ever, and I have my Not a Surf shirt on right now.
Oh, thank you. I didn't even see that. Thank you. That's so sweet.
But Ira, so I really do, though, want you to sort of introduce people to your other band, Bambi Kino, who just on a side note, we just saw you guys a few months ago play, and to me, it was one of the most like happy, joyous, carefree, like just incredibly fun rock and roll shows I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
And little plug, they are playing. Bambi Kino is playing in Brooklyn on December 16th at Union Pool in Williamsburg. So everyone should go, please.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for asking about that. That's a really it's a Bambi Kino is kind of a rare bird, and it's this. Well, it wasn't designed to be, but it happened in this really wonderful, perfect, fortuitous way. The main singer Mark, and I were in a band years ago called Maplewood, a really fun band, kind of a West Coasty, kind of sounds like the band America. And at one point we had I guess we had an American release, we had a German release on a Hamburg label called Tapeta, and they set up a little German tour for us. Mm-hmm. And it was fun, including Hamburg. So the day we had off, we were doing our little Beatles tour, as you do. Here's where they were here, and here's where the place, where's the cavern, not the cavern, but Star Club used to be here, and the Kaiser Keller, that's still there. And there's a venue there called the Grünspan, which is like a 2,000-seat concert venue where Not a Surf had played on a number of occasions. And right next door to it, shoulder to shoulder, is this little place called the Indra, and it's still got the little elephant on it, and there's a plaque on the wall, whatever it is, October 16th, 1960. That's not the exact date, but something like that. Beatles' first show in Hamburg. And we're looking at this plaque on the wall, and this was 2009. Mm-hmm. And that date was the next year was going to be the 50th anniversary. And Mark and I looked at each other and said, shouldn't there be a band playing that shit in that room? I mean, it's a working club with a stage. Like, yes. Shouldn't there? And we would look at each other and and I think within 2 minutes, it's got to be called the Bambi Kino because Mark's like that. And I'm like, yeah, perfect name. Check. Okay. that's taken care of. And then we had to figure out who the rest of the band was going to be. And then I had met Eric, the bass player, because I had just done a Losers Lounge show in New York, the Losers Lounge series. If anyone's not familiar, I can't tell the whole story, but it's a rotating cast of, the band stays the same, rotating singers, and it's a really fun show.
And it's awesome.
So fantastic.
Yeah, we love it.
And I met Eric for the first time. I was the drummer. I was like a fill-in drummer for their main guy for a while who went on the road with Blue Man. And so my first show was a McCartney show. So I was in my element, and Eric was, I don't know who knew Eric, but he came in and we fell in love with each other, rhythm section wise, McCartney fan. He had this killer voice, and we became friends during the whatever week or two of those shows. And he was the first guy I thought of. I'm like, oh, I got to get that guy Eric. He would love to do this. So it was 3. And then Mark had a guitar friend of his who was the original. This is a kind of a Pete Best story. He was the original guitar player, and we did some rehearsals with him, and Eric was not happy with him. He's like, this guy's not really holding it together. And I was on the road with Not a Surf, and I was telling Doug Gillard about this band. He's like, wow. Doug, we were lucky to have Doug Gillard playing in Not a Surf at the time, too, another fortuitous event. And Doug was like, and I'm looking at Doug, and Doug's looking at me, and I said, Mark, you think let's ask Doug Gillard. He's like, hell, fuck yeah. So what I had was this. Suddenly, I was like in Cream all of a sudden,
Right. It's totally like it is a super.
Exactly. That's exactly. So 3 great friends of mine, lovely guys, all massive Beatle fanatics, and let's just do this. Let's go deep into the catalog and do this stuff. So we came at it with this. The beautiful thing about it is if you're a musician who loves the Beatles, and then you can use your musicianship to direct that love back out at an audience. Yeah. That's a very powerful circle that happens because people come because they love that music, and when the band really digs into it and plays it in that sort of and it's a hard thing to get at because people are too polite. You have to learn a rock and roll band in a room is an aggressive, angry, sweaty, nasty thing. Yeah, and it has to be ever so slightly out of control. And so Gillard's one of those guys who can play as if he's completely out of control. You know what? He can lay in a perfect Chuck Berry solo, or he can sort of step on the gas and do some angular television, and make it real, veer off the tracks, and everything becomes very exciting. So everyone's skill level is very high, but the songs don't demand skill. They just demand that you get into them completely and give them everything you have.
And I'm telling you,
so for the 4 of us, it's a rapturous experience. We go, and we're so particular. We only play, we only want to do what we do, which is play for an hour, take a break. Play for an hour, take a break. Don't want to do less than 3. We don't open for your band. We don't want to, we only do we want the whole night. We want to be the band. You go out, you have a beer, you smoke a cigarette, come back in, twist around.
And that's what the Beatles did. I mean,
exactly. We're trying to recreate that experience on a level. It's hard to we don't even mic if depending on the room, and we usually play small rooms, we don't put microphones on all the I don't let them put microphones on the drums, maybe an overhead and a kick mic. It would sound like a modern band if we mic'd everything and put the guitar amps through the PA, vocals through the PA, and maybe some ghostly drums. But the sound of amps in a room, that's Union Pool is perfect for that. It's not a very big room. It's woody, and the guitar amps, you would have these 15, 25 watt guitar amps. They sound killer. You just kick the shit out of them. Drums are fucking loud. You put microphones on drums. Not the way I play them.
Right. So that is why this is so.
So it's very thrilling.
perfectly-
It's thrilling, and you get really deep into that headset of sing. Like I also is a challenge for me because I get to sing lead.
Yeah.
You get to sing all the harmony stuff. I sing a bunch of. I sing One After 909 and Anna, and there's a lot of all the great harmony singing. I love to be a harmony. Oh, that's one of my favorite things. Harmony singing while playing the drums is like that kind of 3-part call answer stuff. Oh, it's so dreamy to be able to do that. It's one of the greatest things. I relish it.
And this is so perfect because this meshes exactly with our show today.
Yes.
All right. So, very last Beatles, Now and Then. What are our overall impressions of it? I mean, this is not something that happens every day. So what do you think?
I'll just say, I might have a lighter take on this than, I mean, I am a hardcore Beatles fan, but like Ira, I think you're like the hardest core Beatles fan I ever know.
Yeah.
But
I guess I earned that reputation.
I am so happy that it came out. And I think it is a wonderful, just beautiful thing that happened. I know some people have opinions like, oh, this was put together by, AI, people were in separate rooms or whatever. But I just want to kind of remind people too, like this, do you remember how we were working during COVID? Like everybody, this is how we were making music too. Everybody's doing this now anyway. So,
but it's not even COVID though.
No,
I mean, I've heard people say that it's not, it's not everybody in the same room, so it's not really a Beatles song. Do you know how many songs ended up on Beatles albums where they weren't together, where it was one guy in a studio, or where it was two of them, and where they're recording parts separately? I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
Does not define
I feel like
Beatles
people
songs.
just should be kind of happy about this, and we've got a beautiful thing. And everyone around, from Yoko to Sean to whatever they're all happy with this. So I feel like that should be the kind of the bar.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
The interesting thing for me is looking at this. I was thinking about this morning, and I think that one of the weird things about it is, I've listened to this record probably a million times by now, and going into it, you're going into it like, okay, I'm hearing the last song by the Beatles. You get that. I'm going to hear a Beatles record where two of the guys are gone and it celebrates them. I get that. But the thing that got me is like, I'm going to listen to a Beatles song that I don't know the words to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was kind of like weird. So I think that if you are a diehard Beatles fan, that kind of puts you in a weird footing to begin with, because what you're getting. Having said that, the first time I listened to it, I cried a little. I think we all did, just because it's so melancholy. And then you just sort of like, the part that gets me isn't on the record. The part that gets me is on the documentary when they play the Lennon vocal by itself.
Yeah.
Right. And, I've heard people say, oh, this is really more of a John Lennon solo record than it is a Beatle record. But you have to put yourself, when you listen to this, in the mindset of 1970. And in the world of 1970, this very well still could have been a Beatles record. This still could have been something had the Beatles not broken up, or still broken up, but later on gotten back together and played again. This could be something that happened. There are lots of different ways in which this record could inhabit the world. We also live in a world that's tearing each other apart. Let's find something beautiful and awesome in it. So I'm celebrating it as a moment in cultural history. I'm celebrating it as hearing, a band that sort of is responsible for the very fabric of me listening to music and playing it on the radio. I also think just the skill and mastery of making it happen is pretty amazing. I mean,
and the story all to its own.
Yeah.
The story of itself, the backstory to it, which I know we're going to get into, is incredible. But just also all the different aspects of it are great. The strings do not sound like they were recorded today and not in 1970. The guitars do not sound like, the Harrison parts do not sound like they're from 1995. This very easily sounds like they're in 4 separate rooms at Abbey Road or wherever doing their thing and then coming together and mixing it. No pun intended. That's what it sounds like to me. There is a certain melancholy to it that I think is really great, which I think is nice. I don't want the last Beatle record to be like, She Loves You, yeah. I kind of want the Beatles to go out like this, right? But it also kind of fits where the Beatles were in 1970 near the breakup, at least to me. So that's kind of my long-winded thoughts on it.
All right, Ira. You've said you've been obsessed with it all week.
Yeah,
so.
no, it's because I was one of those Beatles people who saw it coming from some time. I don't know when. For Mark, my friend in Bambi Kino is a journalist and often gets review copies, and he's like, when journalists find out about things, I find out about them through Mark.
Right.
So we knew whatever months ago this was going to be happening. I'm like, it's marking on my calendar. So, when you anticipate something, it has it gets blown out of proportion. And so, so I was waiting to see when, am I going to buy it? I have to buy it. So I'm shopping for which single I want and which, I'll just get the plain black vinyl, whatever. So it first became a shopping enterprise because I have to add it to my collection at a very basic level, whether it was great, bad, or indifferent. It would still have to sit in the rack with everything else. So That was the first thing. And so, and like everybody else, I watched the short video, the 35-second video. I'm like, interesting, good teaser. And then I waited around and to 3:30, I watched the long one and also cried at the sound of Lennon's voice. It was a very emotional, and the pull quote where they give McCartney, "How lucky was I that I had these five men." That's you can't. Who's not going to tear up a little bit when Paul fucking McCartney says some shit like that? You're like, fuck, hell yeah. So, and then I waited for the single to drop that morning. And then, I did the same as everybody else. And I listened to it. And again, the main selling point is just the sound of John's voice, period. Whatever you say about the rest of the song, the fact that we have just the sound of John's voice is such a magic thing. And maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe young people don't hear the same thing I hear. But like Rob said, the sound of Lennon's voice carries a particular gravitas, in our culture that few things have. And the sound of Lennon and McCartney singing together has an added emotional gravitas that is hard to even, people complaining as they do about Macca's presently croaky singing voice. Someone's like, well, why can't they AI his old singing voice? They should AI that. So that's
you're right. When they hit that harmony, when you hear the Beatles harmony in that song.
McCartney is kind of buried in the mix a little bit. He's not really super prominent. He's there, but he's in a really nice way. So anyway, I see, and then my cynical side, is this just this song is so great? It's repeated the same thing every time. It took me a few listens to understand what's going on. Plus, I have to say, it hit me on a particular level because I find the song to be incredibly sad. And maybe it's because I happen to be at this point in my life, I'm going through a kind of a sad thing. And I don't want to talk about it. It's not important. But as someone who's going through a sad moment in their life, the song hit me on a profound level because it spoke to a sort of an existential sadness about mortality, about a number of things that were really, really, that hit me on a level that was beyond the actual lyrics in the song. The fact that they're kind of a little bit, the original demo was clearly aimed at Yoko, but the McCartneyized version is more about their relationship, clearly about the relationship between John and Paul. The Yoko thing is still there, clearly, but here in this context, you have more. I think McCartney sort of engineered it to be a song in a way about their dynamic, that's how
I'm singing "I Miss You." It's like I'm
there's I think I read an article maybe in the Times today by a guy who by a guy who was writing a book about the relationship between John and Paul specifically, and he wrote this article about they have a very specific relationship, which is almost like lovers in a way, the way they responded to each other in songs in the 70s and the vitriol of the attack song to the attacks, you threw it all, you took it was your lucky break and broke it in two, and how do you sleep, and back and forth, while, all generating a lot of record sales through it as well. But they were great songs. This painful part of their lives generated great songs. And I hear that same pain in this song. So it's very powerful.
You mentioned that, both of you mentioned that moment in the documentary where you hear John's isolated vocal.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that because not only is that such a poignant moment because you're hearing John's voice, but this demo, has been around forever and it's circulated a bit. And, a lot of people have heard the song before this version of it, but you've always heard it in that very muffled sense with the piano that comes in a little too loud and it kind of obscures some of John's vocal and all this kind of stuff. So on both of those levels, to hear that vocal completely isolated away from everything else and ringing as clear and as true as it does I think that they put that in there for both reasons. One, I think it was a demonstration of the technology that made this single possible, but also to just hit you square in the feels. There's John's voice.
Yeah.
What an amazing moment that was.
Peter Jackson talking about that whole, the way they developed the technology first of all, they developed the technology. Peter Jackson and his team, that's incredible. Yeah. And, this is what AI is good for. It's, this is a good use of AI. I feel like this is way they separate, they're separating tracks of music and that is all they're doing.
You couldn't have watched Get Back.
You couldn't have watched Get Back. That's exactly right.
Because, I've heard those, the original tapes. I've had those bootleg for years and they're mostly like, what? Like there's so much noise and pianos and guys clacking clapboards.
Yeah.
You can't make out anything. It's really difficult.
So they created that and then they used it for this.
Yeah, genius.
Yeah.
Right. It's interesting, in both the making of, mainly in the making of, but also in the music video, where they blend the footage of Paul and Ringo now recording the new parts and them working on it in 95, trying to make it happen. And that sort of leads me into the music video. So this is jumping ahead a little bit, but the way that the music video, the vision mixing in that thing, where it takes them from the early 60s and mixes them with the late 60s and mixes them with 95 and mixes them with now, and has different elements, different aspects of each guy interacting with each other and with themselves at different, I just thought it was amazingly well done.
Yeah.
I know you see like little young Paul and younger Paul, and then you see older Paul and John.
My feeling was, I'll be honest, my feeling was really discordant with what I felt the song to be. Like I saw the song as this beautiful, sad, melancholy thing, and the video is very jokey, and
it is in places. I agree.
That bothered me in a way I couldn't really place. And even the mashup of, like he's a genius director. Clearly, we don't have to his credibility is beyond reproach. But I don't know. I didn't come away from that video going, gee, I'm really excited to watch that one more time. I don't know.
I agree with you.
I couldn't enjoy it for some reason. I could be too picky sometimes. I'll go back. I will go back and watch it again. Undoubtedly.
Well,
I totally agree with you. I think that there's that moment where there's a close up on John and he's sort of looking off into the sun, and that is so beautiful. And then there's the one of him and Yoko just walking hand in hand in a park. And I'm shocked that footage even exists. Somebody filmed that. But then everything else is the jokey John. It's the fun loving John. It's the silly John, which is great. I just feel like they may have overemphasized that a little bit because it doesn't match the tone of the video or of the song.
Yeah. That was my issue with it as well. Yeah. Though you're right. There's some beautiful footage in there. Absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
I was also going to say the guy. Well, this is really jumping ahead now, but the guy who did the parody of the video,
I've watched that a number of times.
Yes. See, that to me was really. How special is this? I want to know his name.
Yeah, you got to set this up for listeners who may not have seen this video. What is this that we're talking about?
We're talking about like a meta version of this song already.
It's unbelievable. I find the same video. I found a video that compared the original demo to the song, and they were sort of A-Bing them and what stayed in and what went out. It was a really nice breakdown. And I think I went looking for that, and maybe right below it was that video. It was already trending that night. I'm like, what? I got to check that out. And I think I put it in a list. I didn't watch it, but you said to me the next day, I'm like, there it is. That's
there
that
it
thing.
Is, yeah.
But it looks like tiny little Beatles. He looks really tiny, small in this little set.
I'm like, and he does like the Ed Sullivan show, basically.
The Ed Sullivan set, yeah.
He made it a little tiny. I don't know how he did that. And then he turned that around in 24 hours.
Yeah. So he recorded a version of Now and Then as if the Beatles had recorded it in 1964.
Yeah, and of course he plays every instrument.
Yeah, he does every part.
Yeah.
And I don't know how in the world, it's a great arrangement of the song.
Yeah.
It really sounds convincing, and it makes it feel like that song isn't that removed from the Beatles history, you know, from the early stage of Beatle development. It sounds like it fits. But then the fact that this guy wrote this, recorded this, filmed this, edited this in about 24 hours blows my mind. There's got to
be some sort of prize for something like that. That's just outrageous.
Right.
And so my feeling, Ira, is that the total meta version of this Bambi Kino doing this song, doing his version of it.
That would be a pretty hard sell for me to lay on those guys. I think they would. I actually was going to send them that, and just then we could all like have a laugh about it because it is pretty fucking hilarious.
It is hilarious. I know.
But but I think what you see is like the song itself is really very simple. You know, it's only a handful of 5 or 6 chords, so you can play it in that the early Beatles style. You know, like it doesn't sound like an early Beatles composition chordally or melodically, but you can play it in that style and give it that Chuck Berry thing.
Yes.
So he heard like, oh, if I just kind of I put the chunky guitars on there, and obviously he's got all those instruments too. He had an old Rickenbacker, and he had he got his hair behind his ears to look like Paul. He's got a little.
Oh, he has all the outfits like with the from the different time periods, like Sergeant Pepper. And
he walks in. He does walk-ons as the other Beatles. He comes in and walks out. You got a lot in there. It's
an impressive achievement.
It's hilarious. Yeah. It's hilarious.
I guess I have a question. So I know George is on this, and I think in the little mini documentary they were saying that Paul was saying that he put the slide guitar part on, right? But so how much of George really is on this song?
The rhythm guitar part is George.
That's about it.
Yeah, that's it. Because I don't think
an acoustic rhythm guitar. I think that's George.
Right. They didn't get very far with working on the song in '95, so there's really not much more than that.
Yeah. And the story that I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that George wanted to play slide guitar at the time, and Paul McCartney's response was something along the lines of, "Isn't that a bit too much like My Sweet Lord?" So George was like, "Oh, good. Oh yeah, great. Well, I guess none of that then." So and I think later Paul, the way I read it is Paul had some sort of pangs of regret later on that that's probably not the worst idea. I was the asshole who talked him out of it. I'll have to be the asshole who plays slide, bad slide guitar almost in the style of George Harrison on my Beatles record.
Right.
Paul's a pretty musical guy. Playing slide guitar, I don't know. Not compared to George. He doesn't have, he ain't got it. But I'm glad that he did it though. It's a good moment. It's a beautiful moment in the song. It really is.
I have to say too, that part right at the very beginning of the documentary where you see the three of them just all sitting down, and they both got ukuleles, and Ringo's playing his knee, slapping on his knee.
Yeah. I love
like that. Literally, I'm just like, I'm losing my shit right there. Right. I'm like, if that's the video, you're done. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Seeing these three people together in 1995.
I love that.
Where was this stuff in 95 when they were trying to hawk all this crap on us? That was great. And then just seeing them work together on it, and the backstory of that, like, this is the one they couldn't finish.
Yes.
Right.
And it's the one that was like just sort of eating away at him. And then that puts the context in it with Ringo sort of talking about we had to finish it. And I think we always talk about Paul in here, but this record lets Ringo to really do his drumming comes a little bit more to the forefront than some of the other Beatle recordings of sort of late 60s and 70s. But I also think that there's also a determination in Ringo to do this too, which I thought was interesting because it's been very Paul focused, but that is a very focused, less jovial Ringo we see. We have like straight ahead, balls to the wall Ringo in this thing, which I think is a really interesting contrast to sort of what everyone thinks of Ringo when they talk about him.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that I was planning on bringing up into this discussion is the importance of Ringo in the sound of this song, because Ringo not only has a very distinctive style, but those drums have an incredibly identifiable sound. And when you hear, we were talking about John's voice in isolation, when you hear him doing the drum parts and it sounds like Ringo, those drums just have that ring to them. They were talking about Paul, recorded his parts, sent the tapes over to Ringo to put the drum parts on, and Ringo does his drumming, sends the files back, and Paul says, and now this song is starting to cook, because that's what Ringo adds. He adds that drive to it, and he adds that rhythm and that sound. And I think he is, I'm a drummer, so obviously I think he's absolutely indispensable, but I think that he adds dimensions to these songs that people overlook sometimes.
I think these other two drummers would agree.
I couldn't agree more. I was absolutely fascinated. The thing I wanted to freeze frame in that documentary was that few seconds of him sitting at that particular kit. And I spoke with a drummer friend of mine earlier, who happens to work. He works on Ringo's crew. On the show, on his travel to the All-Star.
Wow.
And I was asking him about if what he knew about the kit in that video, and because I didn't it was I said it was a white marine pearl kit, and he says it's a WFL, which makes it earlier than his standard mid-60s kit. That would have been maybe a mid-50s to early 60s. White marine pearl kit, standard 13, 16, 22, but there also seemed to be, which he couldn't identify. And one of those shots, there seemed to be a second floor tom that had a wooden hoop on it in one of those shots. So we don't know what that is. That's on my drummer brain went to that. And I also couldn't tell what snare drum he had. And he told me that this was most likely a Ludwig piccolo, maybe a 13, one of those 3x13 piccolos that he likes to use for recordings, which makes sense because those kind of drums sound fantastic. You don't think of that as a Ringo drum. I certainly don't. And it doesn't sound weird when he plays it, like he's some da-da-da-dum. It doesn't sound like some weird thing. It sounds very warm and natural. And again, that's the way he plays. That's the sound of Ringo. It's just his attack. And, you can see the way his body languge when he plays, the way he sort of finesses a cymbal, very the sort of grace, put some body language. And, part of that's because he's on film, but that's part of the way he plays it, the cymbals side to side kind of thing. He uses a lot of body English when he plays. It's one of his main characteristics.
Yeah,
puts the shoulder in when he leans forward with his left hand. He kind of puts that shoulder up a little bit.
One thing I thought was very interesting was them having to keep the whole string section that Giles Martin was putting together and composing and recording. Secret in the dark.
That's right. They couldn't tell anyone what it was for.
Yeah, they had. McCartney was there, obviously, but it was sort of like, this is a McCartney thing. They didn't know they were playing on the final Beatles song.
They couldn't let that. They wouldn't. That would be. They couldn't let that kind of stuff sort of leak out.
No,
they had to avoid leaks at all costs.
Yeah, and imagine finding out that. When I want to know how their reactions were when they found out.
We're going to interview those people. Will definitely get interviewed. Like now, knowing what you know now, like I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they didn't tell me. The pressure would have been much worse if bad enough like recording from McCartney. Okay,
and he's standing right there.
How about how easy that? I'm sure that's really easy. Oh, Paul McCartney. Oh, great.
And I wonder if anyone had any suspicions, or if anyone, because you said, Ira, you said it was
like
leaked.
A jury. We're going to find out. I think they're going to come out of the woodwork. Undoubtedly, they're going to seek those people out.
Yeah,
there's no doubt. I give it a week tops.
But I really did love how they brought Giles in for that Son of George.
I love that. I was thinking about, the fact that they buried various elements from other songs. There's some you can hear, some you can't quite hear. And someone was posited that that triplet ending at the end. I'm like, I wonder, like, that's a particular arrangement thing. Obviously, that wasn't on the original demo, so someone had to write that ending. At first, I thought that would be maybe a thing Paul would do. And someone said, no, that's probably from the Giles Martin string arrangement. And I think, let's say Giles wrote that down, down, bound, this sort of 4 chords down. It's a beautiful, in a song that's in this sort of slow motion, 4/4, very slow, about 88 beats per minute. And and then suddenly this little triplet thing at the end. My mind immediately went to the end of, and all the, We Can Work It Out, which goes from 4/4, very moderate tempo, to 3/4, and ends in this particular down, down, and ends, that kind of ends like that. And I thought, oh, what a perfect nod to, if you're going to nod to a song, We Can Work It Out. That's a perfect thing to nod to, this sort of like, hey, John and Paul, we can, it's a perfect John Paul balance song. And you hear it here too. Like we had to find a way to work it out technically. And, I don't know, they worked it out. Like they covered a lot of bases. They really hit a lot of beautiful points. It's beautifully constructed. It's not clunky like the Jeff Lynne was always. They were always. We laugh about it because it's so obvious now. At the time, like we took it because that's what we had. But now, in retrospect, you hear like this beautiful, clean, easy production is so much better for what you want from a Beatles recording. So far, and the fact that now you hear that the sort of ghostly quality of John's vocals on those other tracks, they sound like they're kind of floating somewhere else entirely. Yeah. Here, it's in the track. It's present. That's part of the beauty of it. I think they did an amazing job.
The other thing, too, that I thought was fascinating is that they've kind of talked to some people after this, is that apparently, almost like daily rushes with the filmmaker, like every step of the way, McCartney sent everything to Ringo so he could hear it in real time, too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it is, a lot of people are dismissing this as like, oh, McCartney's finishing a Lennon song. And that bothers me because this is very much a collaboration with Ringo and Paul, but also Sean Lennon and Giles Martin to a certain degree as well. And I just think that kind of irritated me a little bit with people talking about it. But I think that, it is in many ways a love letter between John and Paul, but it is also very much for those two. I think I talked about before, this is unfinished business. Mm-hmm. And I think for them, this is putting away 40 years of grief. I really feel like they're putting away the baggage of John's death. I think Ringo was supposed to see him the next day or something. Or they each were supposed to see John at some point, after the time he got shot. But I think this almost feels like closure to me musically, which is great. And I think you hear it in every level of the song. I think the nods to other Beatles songs are in there. I think the strings as well. They're they're like Paul says, they're very much of the time. So I think calling it Now and Then is a nice bookend because you have past Lennon with present McCartney and Ringo, right? You have past George with current George and Ringo. So it is a song very much about their past, and I hate to say that long and winding road they sort of took, right? I sort of think that idea is sort of in this recording. This is the journey we took together, and now we're closing that door because they couldn't really close that door together. Even though they broke up and it was hostile and it was ugly, I think the Beatles were very much in the mindset of like, it was almost a pause. And I think at some point they probably would have done something, and then it would have been a clean, more pleasant close of the door.
So I have a question, Rob, to this point. Why do we not, or do we just not remember when we heard Free as a Bird for the first time, let's say, or Real Love? Did we not think that then, that it was sort of the closure? Because we didn't know Now and Then 20 years later, 15, whatever it would be.
I think because Free as a Bird, when I heard Free as a Bird, it was like, okay, this is nice. It's really upbeat. And I thought, man, I remember when Free as a Bird came out and I heard it and I was working at a record store. It's like, I thought the last Beatle record should be sad.
I have to say, I don't think Free a Bird is a particularly happy song. I think the other one, Real Love, is kind of happy.
Yeah,
I agree.
There's something, again, melancholy in that song.
Well, it's got more hooks in it. It's got more. It's more
structured out. Yeah,
it's
a little more structured out quarterly.
Did we all feel sad then, kind of, and feel like that was the closure, or did we not?
I don't know.
I did not feel it was closure. I thought it was kind of like, it was a little too, I guess structured is the word I was using, but I'm using the word as a little too poppy for me, but I'm probably struggling to find the right sort of
Again,
word.
I think we got to chalk that up to Jeff Lynne. I'm going to point to Jeff Lynne and say that possibly the reason that it had this kind of feeling, that because Jeff Lynne really made it into a pop, like this very solid pop structure. It gave it a, this sort of a, I don't know how to, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Here you hear something. This production style is so much more naturalistic, like you would want a Beatles recording to be, where all the elements are clean and clear, tonal, the tonality of the drums, not this big 80s kind of Jeff Lynne snare drum.
That, Ira, that is it. I felt like Free as a Bird was a Beatles song that got handed to somebody else to finish.
Yeah.
And that always just kind of, I thought.
See, what I'd like to hear is I like to hear them going back and remix those two and un-Jeff Lynne them.
Oh, interesting.
Like they did with with Phil Spector's. Yeah, let's un-Jeff Lynne those last two.
Free as a Bird.
Yeah, naked. I'll buy that. Yeah, that's another single for next Christmas. I'll buy that shit.
The only reason Lynn's there is because he's hanging around Harrison, right? Pretty much. Yeah.
He and Harrison are tied at the hip at that point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a
okay. So that's
issue,
interesting.
no
I just was wondering if it was like just a perspective thing, or like we're not remembering because that was so long ago, or not.
It's possible. I don't remember having the same feeling of.
No, I did not.
Of final finality that I feel now.
I didn't either.
I remember, I worked at a store. I heard it. Our job was to sell it. It was selling like crazy. That sort of felt like, and again, it's the 90s, so the timing of when it came out is different. That felt almost like a money grab to me, right? Or almost like a filler. It didn't really feel like, I knew it was a Beatles song, but I just kind of like, it's kind of an afterthought. Like I went back and listened to those two songs again for the first time in decades after this. I know you said it reminded you of an ELO song, right? But I'm listening to Free as a Bird and I'm almost like, is this a song someone's giving the Flaming Lips? That's the first thing I thought of, right?
Yeah.
It's like it just
spacey.
didn't
There's a lot of like flanging, and
it just
did a lot of magical stuff. Yeah,
it just didn't sound like any era of the Beatles I could tangentially put my hand on.
Yeah, it sounded like Jeff Lynne's version of the psychedelic Beatles.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm going to be totally honest. I think that this one has much more of sound of finality to it because it's not just John that's gone.
Yeah.
It's John and George.
Yeah.
And it's Paul at 81 and Ringo, right up there with him. So I think that this, just because of its timing, just has much more of a feel of, the final hammer being
that pains me to think lowered. Of that, like that they are that age, because it makes, it's just, I don't know. That gives me a heartache, honestly.
Well, what's amazing is that they aren't old men.
No, they're not.
They're 80, but they don't. They're still so vibrant and so vital.
Well, they take really good care of themselves. They have active lifestyles. They're moving around. They're on tour. Like they're super active.
Still like, I don't know.
Yeah, no. It's all, the other thing about this song is that there's a mortality in it. I hear it immediately. I hear it in the first verse. I was looking at the lyrics earlier. And I just want to quote them. It's just I know it's true. It's all because of you. And then he says this, and if I make it through. Now, that line is really super powerful. Make it through implies like you're in something that you need to get out of. You're in something bad and you hope you get out of disease or something really bad and you hope you get out the other side. So when I hear like, and if I make it through, and in a way, like John didn't make it through, like John's been gone a long time now. So in a way, this is a very sad comment about what could have been, what should have been.
Yeah.
It's the past singing. It's it's so many things. It's so beautiful, and it's profoundly sad because But the other thing that really gets me is the other lyric is this one. He says, in the one that now and then I miss you, and now and then I want you to be there for me, always to return to me. That's so beautiful and so romantic. And I don't even know if John said that on the original demo, or that's something that I think Paul added that line, always to return to me, as one of Paul's specific additions to the song, if I'm not mistaken. There's this like, it's beautiful. It's so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking.
One of the things that I have heard in an accusatory manner about this song is people feel that Paul has been too heavy-handed in recontextualizing or changing the narrative. And I'm just wondering, I don't think that any of us agree with that.
No,
I can't agree with that at all. I mean, not the way I see it. No, I could set up a very good argument. No, I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
I think he's too emotionally involved in it.
Yeah.
I if anything else, I think he's walking around this thing on eggshells.
Yeah,
right?
I think he's looking back also at I think he's got 80 years to look back on. Well, not 80, but for the
he's
Beatles,
he's the main caretaker of left of the Beatles legacy. Ringo can only do so much, but he being the creative force that he is, it was able to guide this process in a way that, like.
There's
That's
no
the best, you couldn't really have, you have all the Ringo you could get. Paul, engineered that they figured out how to do it and, craft it into something a little more concise. I mean, he's like, I give it all to McCartney. And I just read a book about a year ago about, it's called The Beatles and the Historians. And it's a really interesting, really crunchy book about how the Beatles story as it was perceived over time, and she broke it into basic 4 sections. And the first section is while the band existed, there was an understood band, like, this is what the Beatles are. There's no boss, and we're all really, there was an understood, and no one in the band or around the band crossed those lines or said what the real truth was about who the Beatles were. And then that was existed while the band existed. When the band broke up, the overarching narrative about the Beatles came from John, who was the only one who said anything for a long time. And he did a big interview with John Wenner. And all through the 70s, John's bile about McCartney and being a pretty face and all the crap songs that they were awful that he wrote, that became the overarching thing. Everyone like, oh, yeah, John's, yeah, John. And because everyone loved John. And then after he died, it got worse, because John wasn't there, so everyone lionized John. And Paul started a campaign somewhere in the mid-'80s to try to take back some ground, because he had been painted as somehow not as creative as John. And he was equally important to the growth of the Beatles in every way that John was. They were both completely different individuals, but the idea that it was John, and then Paul was some kind of, that's the way John would have painted it if you go by his narrative that he set up in the early 70s. And that's what most Beatles fans kind of adhered to for a long, long time. And then McCartney started his process of sort of trying to wrest the narrative back from his perspective, which he was very successful at, I think. Many years ago, was that the book that he wrote with this from Miles? He wrote that book in the 80s or the 90s, Many Years From Now. Fantastic. So, and he was very good at it. And then the fourth phase of the Beatles came around Mark Lewison, because people were writing all kinds of Beatles books about what they perceived and what they saw, but they wouldn't attribute stuff. And Mark Lewison approached it like a historian and said, well, who said what and how good a source is that? Secondary sources. So he approached the Beatles story like a historian would, and didn't put anything in the story that he couldn't absolutely prove. So there's a lot of these books written with a lot of hearsay, and this guy supposedly, they don't tell you where Lewison did the research and made sure everything that they've been talking about since their demise, he's like figured it out, like
that's interesting,
as best he can, what's what and what isn't. So we're in this phase now where Beatles history is much clearer, because we have a much clearer view from all these different sources, but they're who are passed away.
The Get Back documentary also really clarifies a lot of that, and you see Paul. Well, you see them all. I mean, and I think, I don't know if you remember what I said about that, but you also see Ringo's. What a powerful presence Ringo is, even though he's not saying much. He's not doing much. He's sitting there like this with his arms crossed half the time, looking at the other three. Yeah. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, the song comes together. Why? It's because of Ringo. So there's that too. And then there's, of course, George. I mean, but definitely you see, I think in the documentary, you see Paul really, really coming out of, out from under the shadow of John's, what John used to say, about him and stuff.
It's a I was absolutely fascinated with that dynamic, and I did think there were moments I thought, wow, Paul, why are you trying to write this whole fancy lyric under like this beautiful plaintive, like, and don't let me down. He tries to add this whole sort of call and response vocal thing with George, and like George is like, really, and I'm like, really. Because we all know how the song ended up. And the only guy there who wasn't like, really, was Lennon, who was like, whatever. John kind of checked out, He's like, he's Paul McCartney. He'll figure it out. I'm sure he'll come up with something great. I don't get it, but I'm glad they dropped that idea. But no, I thought that was like, that's kind of pretty pushy of Paul to write this whole kind of cutesy call and response thing in this song that John is like John is like leaving it all on the table. That song is like really pretty he's barfing up this like profound love for Yoko Ono. It's pretty crazy.
So the last part of this story is that, so this episode is coming out on November 6th, and the end of this week, Friday, November 10th, the reissue of the big collection, the red and blue collections, which is the early part of the Beatles and then the second half of the Beatles, with Now and Then included in it, is going to be released, and they are both expanded editions. And the second volume includes all of Giles Martin's remasters of, all the later albums. And the first volume is going to also include everything on that CD or on the album is going to be remastered, or has been already remastered by Giles. So this is our first time hearing Giles's Atmos remasters on the earlier material, and I'm really excited about that. I'm definitely going to be buying both volumes because I want that new, the most clear version we can get of the earlier stuff, and I have to be completist about it, so I have to have them both. So I'm very excited to get those collections again because I've had them a few times already.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I have a collection. The only thing I collect, and seriously, is Beatles records. So I just want to show off my collection. So now I have to say, like, I grew up in the Beatle world, but the red and blue albums, I didn't own them. I wasn't interested in them until I became a collector, and I felt I had to have some. So I have the original U.S. release of the red and blue on the not very special, but that's the original U.S. one from the time. But what I didn't know was that there was a UK version of the same thing.
Oh,
where maybe slightly, I don't remember now, but there's slightly different track order or different songs and maybe different mixes. So I had to get them. And then in 1978, it turns out what I don't know, it was an anniversary, maybe 25 years. I don't know what the anniversary was, but in 78, for some reason, they Apple Capital released a bunch of like special edition stuff, like picture discs and colored vinyl stuff. And of course, they put out the red and blue albums in red and blue vinyl.
Oh,
yep,
yeah.
So as they're doing now, obviously,
I have those. Yeah.
So I have. That's part of my they're not rare or anything, but they're really fun and beautiful.
That's pretty
nice.
Yeah. No, they're really lovely. I love. I have a sort of a penchant colored vinyl and picture discs. I think that I find them really fascinating. Cool. And then of course there was and then they remastered them in 2014. So I think these are like, I didn't even crack these. These are like,
wow.
Still, yeah. I'm like, why do I need to listen to this record at all? I just want to own it.
Yes. And now there's 2 more for you.
Yeah, now another 3 for me to not listen to. I'm gonna leave them in the case. It'll be worth more in 20 years when I sell them. Now I'm wondering whether I open it at all or not. I don't know.
Well,
I'm still debating.
There's the brand new mixes by Giles of the early stuff, so I have to listen to it.
Yeah. You're right.
You're gonna have to open it. Face it.
Yeah.
So you got to get 2 copies, one that you can keep sealed and one that you can open.
Well, you kind of get an idea of what that's going to be like too with "Love Me Do," which is the B-side.
Yeah.
So you kind of get an idea of what you're going to hear.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We might add too that by the end of the week we're recording this, the Beatles will have scored their 18th number 1 hit in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the minute I heard this, I'm like, I don't care if the record's terrible. I just want the Beatles to be number 1 because I didn't get to see that really in my lifetime. Right. And I was talking to somebody about this as well the other day. Is that like I'm living in most people in the generation before me lived in a world where the Beatles and the Stones both had albums on the top 40 charts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only time I've ever had it was sort of like when it's like a reissue or something, right? And normally it was like one was leaving it, but we're going to have like the top 5 albums are going to be Beatles and the Stones. And this is a great friggin' moment for rock and roll, right? Put away the vocoders, put away the drum machines. As much as I love them, as much as everybody, this is a moment for rock and roll. It's also a cultural moment. This is a great opportunity to really just learn about the cultural and historical legacy of rock and roll and where we are now. Because this is a time when you learn about the Beatles, you can learn about the Stones, take it a step back, listen to Little Richard, listen to Chuck Berry, listen to Buddy Holly, just keep going back. This is the time to do that. We've gotten away from this as music consumers, and I'm really hoping that this opens a door, because I know the Buddy Holly remasters are coming, I think next year, but I'm hoping this is a time that a lot of people just really appreciate this particular moment in music, that we had these these two bands and especially the Beatles walking on the planet, because really we live in this era now. I don't know how it is now for you as a touring musician that's making records, but to me, as someone who plays them, we've moved away from album to single. Yeah. And the Beatles were the king of, along with Elvis, of single, right? And then they started doing the album. So this is an interesting dichotomy where we are at the Beatles. And I'm just so happy that whole new groups of people are going to discover this. That's the big thing about those two records coming out. Yeah. And this thing, I think, sort of ties that together. I think this is the connection between those records coming out and where we are now. It sort of gives somebody a present.
Yeah, it'll reignite. And I always talk about the idea that in 1977, when they released the Star Club recordings, they had been bootlegged for many years, and the Beatles didn't want to release them, so someone started a label, I think Wing a Song. There was another label that released them in 77, and I'm of the mind, I don't know if I read this somewhere or just I really feel like that was really really helpful to what became the punk and the power pop movement, was this sort of really brutal, primal, early Beatles, like bar band energy of just these, nasty guitars and, this manic early rock energy. I think it was really, I think a lot of people were influenced by it at the time. And I think I think every time there's a major Beatles release, people focus back on the beautiful simplicity of their songwriting, the power of them as individuals, but how they were able to sort of meld these things into these compositions.
Mm-hmm. And
it's timeless. It's always very influential. I hope it will be as well.
That sort of ramshackled sound that they had too, that sort of like Bill Haley on Speed.
Oh yeah.
As an era of the Beatles.
To be technical, was Prelude, and if you want to be precise.
I mean, I think that's. I'm
trying to get my hands on some Prelude, and I can't find any anywhere. I'm trying. It's out of stock.
That's Steph. All right. You.
Okay.
No.
People keep asking, are we back? Yeah, I guess we're back. Back to talk about cigars, movies, TV shows, and any other nerdy topics here on the Cigar Nerds Podcast. Check us out on cigarnerdpodcast.com and esonetwork.com. And we have a YouTube channel at Cigar Nerd Podcast, where we do cigar reviews, live versions of the show, and any other dumb thing we think to record.
Okay, and this past week, I asked around in a few places for people to share with us their initial impressions of this new song, and we got a lot of great responses, primarily from a Facebook group of fans of a now defunct Sirius channel, Volume. Shout out to all my fellow Volume maniacs. So here's what people were thinking about a day after this song came out. Brent Sowers says, Paul should have left the, quote, George-like slide solo off. Otherwise, I love it. Maybe if I didn't watch the documentary first, I might have enjoyed the solo more. Julie Ann Anderson says, I really like it, but I agree with the melancholy feeling. It makes me think of people I love in heaven.
April McBride says, this made me misty-eyed. The band back together is something special. Jan Spencer says, oh crap, I listened, and damn it, now I'm crying.
And we have this from Eric McGee, who says, I'll be the first person to tell you I'm not the biggest John Lennon fan, but having the Beatles back together through modern technology is still magical. We also heard from Dean Lucas, who said, I was left feeling a bit sad. The song itself was better than I expected, but I had a hard time shaking off the melancholy vibe I got from it.
Mm-hmm.
Kevy Zim responded by saying, like it a lot. Lennon's isolated voice in the documentary is haunting. It's much better than the other two, quote, new songs from 95. And Mike Garvin said, not a comment on the song itself, but hearing John's voice on something I haven't heard before gave me goosebumps.
We heard from Drew Frady. I hope I'm saying that right, Drew. Says, I'm a pretty big Beatles fan. I've seen Paul and Ringo live. They should have left well enough alone. In my opinion, this is just mediocre. And let's see, Stuart Tauble says, I'm a big Beatles fan. I have their channel on preset and sing Harmony in the car. That said, it's not as good as Free as a Bird or Real Love. I was hoping for Goosebumps.
And we heard from Gerald Williams. At first listen, I thought it was pretty good, but with each subsequent listen, I find I like it more. I even found myself humming it at the grocery store while I was shopping. It definitely has the flavor of each Beatle, from Paul's bass to Ringo's drumming style. Other than Paul's integration of George's slide guitar style, it really doesn't feel Beatles to me. It feels more like John did a solo song and his mates contributed. Either way, I still really enjoy it. And then we heard from someone named J.M. Tuffley.
Who's that guy?
Yeah, who's he?
Free as a Bird and Real Love required Paul and George to sing alongside John's cassette vocal because it helped mask the quality they could get out of the tape at the time. The anthology tracks still have the piano from the demo attached to John's vocal. In the new track, John's vocal and the piano are separate, which is nice, but if you didn't know the other players on it, you'd swear it was a John Lennon solo track.
Yeah, thanks for all that feedback. That was a lot of different opinions from all over the spectrum, and I think that's very telling. And, I appreciate everybody chiming in. All right, well, Ira, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Oh, my gosh.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Tell us what's coming up for you, for Not a Surf, for Bambi Kino, whatever's going on.
I can give you two things I can tell you for sure.
Okay.
Bambi Kino, Union Pool, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, December 16th.
Yes.
That'll be a beautiful Saturday night. Wear a leather jacket. I hope it's going to be leather jacket weather.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to be in the pointiest shoes you've ever seen in your life, and I'm going to get. I'm ready to kill it. Please. I was going to tell this whole story. I'm not going to go into it, but the last Bambi Kino show was revelatory for me, and I made some mistakes, but I'm not making those mistakes again. Okay. So I'm ready to kill. I'm very, very excited about it. So Bambi Kino is going to be one of its rare performances then, right just before Christmas. And then Not a Surf has been working on a new record. We've got the final mixes are coming in, I think maybe tonight, tomorrow.
My gosh.
We're our friend, same with the people we've used the same studio we used on the last record. That was Queen's old studio there in Wales, beautiful studio. And our producer Ian, the same as the last record. Some of the same characters because they were available to us. So, and our friend John Goodmanson is a really great mixer up in Seattle. He's doing the mixes and they sound fat and beautiful. So that's coming together, and we are. It's one of those things I shouldn't talk about out of school, but there's a record. We're changing labels, and it's kind of there's a little flux going on, and we'll see how it pans out. But one way or the other, we'll be releasing a record somewhere in the middle of next year.
Oh, this is so exciting!
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing to me. I personally can't believe it. But given all the variables that were 20, it's almost 25 years. I think the first single came out. The first record was 96, and now it's
amazing.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. 23 years.
Ira, you guys, I feel, and I'm not just saying this, but every record is better than that. You guys get better.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Like that's really an amazing thing for a band
so
because that does not happen not all the time, but that doesn't happen all the time. Let's put it that way.
Well, we're just getting better at whatever it is we are. I guess, we get better and better at it as we get older because we're not, I don't know. We have our own particular means of expression. It's very particular and it's completely ours, and we lean into it. So I'm very Matthew has written a batch of really beautiful songs, and they're starting to sound fantastic. And so we'll see. There's some record label issues, like I said, but we'll sort all that stuff out.
Well, maybe you will allow us to invite you on again once the album comes out, and you can.
I'll give a track by track.
Yeah,
excellent.
Say what snare drum was on each track.
Matthew, you guys come on, Matthew.
I made notes about what snare drums I use. I don't know what.
Nice.
I finally started writing these things down. I don't know why I don't do that.
Nice. All right, Stephanie, where can people find more about you?
Oh, okay. You can find me on Facebook at Stephanie Seymour Music. You can find me on Instagram at there_r_birds. And I also have a website, therearebirds.com. And you can find me on, Spotify and all those, what do you call them? Streaming things.
What do you call them?
Those
streaming
and streaming. Ooh.
That where you go back in time?
Yeah.
Like that.
Yes, exactly. All right, bravo.
So you can find me on KDHX in St. Louis on Wednesdays from 7 to 9 with Juxtaposition. What we affectionately call Season 28.
Affectionately calls season 28.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a while. I'm old. And that's on Wednesdays from 7 to 9 Central. So add the time. I don't know math. And you can listen to that. So if you're out and about and you miss it, you can go to the archive stream and listen to it later. Or you can listen to it in real time, however you want to do it. All the shows are archived for 2 weeks. Also Mondays from 6 to 8 Greenwich Mean Time, which is the middle of the day in America, which is fantastic. You can listen to my show Antics on Louder Than War Radio as well, which is a little bit more free form than the other show. And then also I'm also on the needcoffee.com podcast. And I'm on Facebook and the whatever they call Twitter now, and also Blue Sky.
Right on.
All right. And I've got a couple of other podcasts.
I got to up my profile. I don't have enough stuff to talk about. What am I doing?
You can check me out on the Earth Station Trek podcast, which is a Star Trek show, obviously, and on Doctor Who A to Z, which is all about Doctor Who. All right. Everybody take care. Thank you so much for listening this week. We will be back next week to talk about the great producers. Looking forward to it. Everybody take care. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping for the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.